Electoral College. It would be an uphill fight, but I want to get the read on all of this from Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner. Senator, very good to see you.
Hey, Neil.
What do you make of what your colleague, Senator Boxer, wants to do, just get rid of the Electoral College?
Well, listen, I think it'd be a worthwhile debate. I think, Electoral College kind of favors one team over another depending on the election. When you start looking at a 1 million, 2 million vote differential, I don't think, candidly, it's going to happen, but there might be a civics lesson in there for all Americans. We kind of think the winner takes all, and I would remind folks that back in 2012, Donald Trump actually suggested getting rid of the Electoral College and letting the popular vote reign. But
yeah, he still feels it. No, he actually still feels that way in an interview here. But obviously, it's hard to say in retrospect if the two of them had been fighting a race to get the most popular vote. They would have fought a different race, so there's no way to say that this outcome would have been the same.
There's no,
and
we're
do
never
you
going to
worry?
know.
Do you worry now? Virginia's obviously a pretty big and important state in and of itself, but that smaller states or those with smaller populations would be overlooked in such a scenario.
Well, let's face it, Neil. Virginia was never that competitive in presidential elections until 2008. We didn't see any presidential candidate for 40 years. So, and in this election, you didn't see presidential candidates going to, Texas or California that much in terms of Trump or Clinton on active campaigning. So there's a lot of the country that's left out in this process. But I think,
but wouldn't you
frankly,
emphasize that all the more, sir? But if the Republican would try to go to Texas to run up the tally, the Democrat to California to run up the tally, or maybe parts of those urban areas where each was strong, right?
You might. I mean, and again, we don't know if they don't spend time and then in the so-called half dozen or dozen battleground states, what would mean in those states.
Right.
I think it's a worthwhile debate. I do think when the margins start into the millions and you get above 1 or 2% differential this year, it's not going to get to 1% differential, I don't think, then, it's worthy of having a debate. But I guess, Neil, the point I want to make is I think this election was about a lot bigger things. And I think it was in many ways a repudiation of the Democrats, but it was also a repudiation of the Republican establishment. It was a repudiation of a lot of the media. It was a repudiation of most of the corporate Fortune 500 CEOs, none who embraced Donald Trump. And I think those of us, particularly somebody like myself who've got a business background, we got to find a way to make modern American capitalism work for more people. I think some of the incentives have gotten out of line, and the options being offered by some on the far left on my side and some on the far right, I don't think that's where it's going to be. And we're not going to go back to an economy where everybody works in the same job for 40 years the way my dad did. And that means a fresh look at the social insurance system, probably portable benefits. It means looking at how we can get our businesses to think about long-term investments.
What you're doing right now, Senator, is actually the way to look forward, ways for Democrats and Republicans to work together. What I see going on with a lot of these protests, and they've continued and built up since the election last week, is that they're not accepting the results for whatever, the electoral, the popular vote thing, back and forth. But even Hillary Clinton and President Obama have told people, honor these results, let's move on. But they don't move on. And I'm wondering if that is doing lasting damage, not only to the president-elect, but potentially to all of you in Washington as you try to grapple with these issues.
Well, Neil, I think people got a right to protest, not violent protesting. I'm concerned about some of the reports coming out of Portland. But let's be honest with each other. I mean, Mr. Trump, before he was elected, was potentially saying the system was rigged and be on guard. I believe if this election had gone the other way, we would still be seeing protests against a President-elect Clinton. So the vitriol.
Well, don't you find it odd then that it's Democrats who had said that would happen with Trump supporters if they lost, that they are the ones doing it?
Point made. But I think there were an awful lot of folks who felt that some of the language that candidate Trump used was kind of so far outside the norm.
But you, Senator Warner, would give him the benefit of the doubt and see what he does. And then if you're for protest, you could protest afterwards, right?
Well, listen, as somebody who expected it to go the other way and had reached out to a lot of my Republican colleagues saying, hey, let's find some common ground, the shoe's on the other foot, I owe an obligation to give him that same benefit of the doubt. And I hope he is going to put together an administration that's inclusive of all Americans. I am anxious to see, and you and I have talked about fiscal issues for a long time, how he's going to do this massive tax cut and potentially great new spending on infrastructure, which I'd support, and not raise that $19 trillion debt that we've already got in place. And I've talked to some of my friends in the House and the Freedom Caucus to say, hey, we all got to stay strong on debt and deficit. So, I'm anxious to see what he lays out. But I do think one of the things, as somebody who made the transference from business to government without ever being elected anything before I was governor, the words of a candidate versus the words of a president-elect, words of a candidate for governor versus the words of a governor are very different. And sometimes you can't run a government just the same way you would run a business. And I, again, wish him well, but I'm going to be watching kind of who he appoints and what kind of tone he takes.
All right, Senator, you've been consistent on these issues of worrying about deficits and debt. It is fair to say it's a little rich coming from some of your colleagues, though, who suddenly are concerned.
I think we could make that comment, Neil, about folks on both sides of the aisle. The debt and deficit crowd who's talked about tax reform and entitlement reform, but also new revenues.
I think it's fair to say though, that many in your party have been resistant to some of that. Now, I'm not saying it's all one way, but I am saying when I hear some super liberals talking about let's be fiscally responsible, I think
all you got to grant me,